Good morning, everybody. Welcome. We're at the Project Metrics That Matter webinar between Aimsio and GateOne Projects. It's a really practical guide to evaluating the performance of projects. And my name is Dennis Hale. I'm the VP Sales with Aimsio, and incredibly excited to be introducing these two fine gentlemen here to the group. And first off is Abbas. So I'll let Abbas say a quick hello and introduce himself.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Abbas Sarraf. I'm one of the co-founders and Chief Product Officer at Aimsio. So my pleasure to have Dave today. I met him in 2017. I reached out because he's been doing some cool stuff on the project management side, and I wanted to learn from him. And I kind of kept doing that up until now. So great pleasure to have him on board. And yeah, I'll let him introduce himself.
Sure. Thanks, Abbas. This is Dave Maller with GateOne Projects. Have been very passionate about the wonderful world of project management, and still continue to be a student of the discipline. And I'm a huge supporter and user of the Aimsio tool, which I'm excited to showcase a bit about today as well. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dave. And it's great to have got both you guys here today. So just to give you a high-level overview of the agenda for the next 45 minutes or so, we'll certainly keep it on time, maybe go a little bit less, but certainly not more. We're going to get into just a quick review of the Aimsio Just Cause. Then we're going to dive right into the amazing content that Dave has prepared for us today. Then we'll get into some Q&A and cover the highlights, and we'll take it from there. So just to kind of recap, today, we're joined by some wonderful Aimsio customers and some wonderful individuals who are actually not Aimsio customers as well. And, the common thread between all of them, of course, is that they're passionate, hardworking people. So you guys are all passionate, hardworking individuals. Many of you are running these, big projects that are, either building pipelines or facilities or putting in instruments and electrical components into buildings, you name it. But you're all incredibly hardworking individuals. And our core purpose is to really try and make your jobs as seamless as possible and really build on operational excellence, which is exactly what Dave is going to cover here. To date in Aimsio, we've completed in conjunction with our customers over 300,000 projects. And of course, these projects are ranging from smaller projects to multi-million-dollar projects. So we've certainly seen a tremendous amount of work be pushed through the system. And that's helped us develop some wonderful product features, mostly through Abbas and his team, to help make this even easier, and people like Dave to make this process even easier. So again, without too much more delay, I'm going to let Dave take the reins here and get right into project metrics that matter. So thanks so much, Dave. I'll let you go ahead and share your screen.
Okay, you bet. Thank you. Just make sure that share is up. That's
all
working.
good.
Okay,
yeah,
excellent. Yes, thanks, Dennis, and thanks, Abbas. I appreciate the really appreciate the opportunity to share some thoughts that I have and the passion that I have for project management and our relationship with Aimsio. The purpose of my sort of presentation today is really just to highlight the strategies that I use to understand the health of my projects and to gain insight into whether I'm excelling or trending below my intended plan for my project. Obviously in the short time that we have, obviously not able to cover everything, all strategies around the wonderful world of project management, but I'd like to focus on ones that really provide me with the information that I need to understand if I need to have a bit of a deeper dive or more investigation into certain tasks or my project as a whole. I also just want to briefly talk about the role of a project manager and kind of quickly look at some of the reasons why projects seem to underperform. Before I get into that, though, I just wanted to maybe quickly talk about some of the observations I've seen with respect to the evolution of a competitive advantage with respect to project-based businesses, and specifically around where we are now with project management, project analytics. And early in my career, I really seemed to observe that the initial competitive advantage to some project-based businesses were the resources that they had. They seemed to have the best people or the best equipment was their competitive advantage. They had Dave, who was a great welder and the best in the business, but now early on then everybody seemed to have the best people, the best welder, the best equipment. And so the next evolution I felt was the safety component. companies were putting together a really robust safety plan and tracking safety statistics, and that became their competitive advantage. But then everybody seemed to put together a great safety plan. Then I seemed to feel like it shifted to a quality program, became the next competitive advantage. But then again, that competitive advantage shrank when everybody started putting together a quality program and for their companies. To where I feel like it is today, the current competitive advantage within a project-based business is a mature project management program, specifically with project analytics. I feel like those companies who are able to provide real-time optics on their projects today have that current competitive advantage. And of course, like all competitive advantage, those will shrink. And so I think now we're right at a really interesting opportunity, especially with using the Aimsio application. This is a real competitive advantage for project-based businesses. So specifically the role of project manager, I think we can agree that there's some unique skill sets with respect to project managers. They're planners, they're motivators, they're leaders and communicators and have an analytical mind. But another observation that I sort of made throughout my career was that organizations have tended to take their best performing worker and put them in the role of project manager with maybe little or to no project management training, assuming that, because they were such a great, framer or computer programmer or welder, they would be a great project manager. And that's kind of rarely the case, which I think contributes to, somewhat of the poor execution of projects. And when we, determine the success or failure of a project, we often look at the metric of, did our project finish on time and on budget? And if it did, then great, success. And if it didn't, then hey, failure. I just wanted to maybe look at it a different way. On this little sample here, the scenario, assuming that I didn't introduce any changes or to my design, or that any project overruns were not a result of me being the client, we can sort of immediately assume or take the position that this project was a failure, and that it took almost twice as long to complete, in this case, my house, and almost 20% more of a cost. However, I'd like to suggest that the project itself was a success in that, I received what I asked for. I wanted a home to be built as per my design, and that's what I received. It's the execution of the project that, in my determination, was unsuccessful, and that's where I kind of want to focus some of my time. I do, though, just quickly want to explore, some of the elements that are sort of a cause to why projects underachieve. And I think if you were to do a quick search online you would see some commonalities come right away as to why projects underperform, whether it be lack of support or inadequate systems or lack of skill set. And I just want to have the second one, and lack of understanding of the actual scope of work. And I have this this story that I always bring myself back to: Van Halen and brown M&Ms. And some of you may be aware of this. So Van Halen was a big arena band in the 80s. Actually one of my favorite bands, until they broke up and then I died that day. But so Van Halen, would put on these amazing, very complex arena shows. When they roll into town, they would roll in with 15, 20 semi trucks full of pyrotechnics and stage apparatuses. And so in their contract, they would actually include a clause or a rider that said, in their dressing room, they wanted a bowl of M&Ms. However, there can be no brown M&Ms in that bowl. And in addition to that clause, it said that if there were either no M&Ms or that there were brown M&Ms in that bowl, they had the right to cancel their contract, but yet be fully compensated for that concert. And it wasn't, at first glance, it's like, oh, geez, these guys are just, prima donnas. Like, come on. But there was sort of method to their madness, in that, they were putting on some pretty elaborate and stage performances with, again, pyrotechnics and whatnot. And they felt that if they showed up to their dressing room and there was a bowl of M&Ms without any brown M&Ms in it, they felt that their contract was fully read and understood, and they had a sense of safety with respect to their show. And so it's a story that always reminds me that, hey, as a project manager, I need to fully understand the scope of work that I'm about to engage in, to understand what my parameters are, so I can operate and execute a project successfully. And so just a funny story that I always remembered about one of my favorite bands of Van Halen.
Very
So
cool.
with that, I just want to now a bit transition into how I identify areas of concern or create some optics for me on a project. So for myself, I really want to compare my production or what I've completed against what I have spent to complete that work and against what resources I've consumed, to complete that work as well. In my, sort of comparative analysis, I want to see if all those three elements are aligned, meaning did I spend the appropriate amount of money and use the appropriate amount of resources to achieve a given production? Or in other words, if I've completed 50% of the work of a given task, did I use 50% of my budget for that task, and did I use 50% of the planned resources? And so this, graphic sort of gives me some quick optics on, do I need to investigate more, or do I have some comfort and confidence that this particular task or project as a whole is this running sort of on track or within the parameters of the project? Now, to help in understanding each of these elements, there's a variety of project management formulas that provide specific insight into and identify areas of concern. And that's kind of what I want to focus the rest of the majority of my time here is on these specific formulas that I use. I want to showcase, define what these formulas are, but then showcase them in a real sort of real world scenario. And I'll highlight them in both just in Excel to illustrate how the formulas work, but then also showcase them in Aimsio and how Aimsio provides optics on each of these elements, and also gives me clear optics on the health of my project. And a lot of you will obviously be familiar with some of these formulas, but I just want to, just for clarity, just so we're all on the same page, kind of run through them one by one here. So the earned value, or EV, is essentially the amount that I have earned based on the actual amount of work completed. My cost performance, or cost performance index, as it's known, or CPI, is essentially a measure of my cost efficiency. The CPI is an indicator of my cost performance, meaning it identifies if I'm trending over, on, or under budget. Now, the CPI is represented represented a ratio compared to 1. So just kind of in easy terms, a CPI greater than 1 indicates that my task or project is trending under budget. A CPI of less than 1, of course, indicates the opposite, that it's trending behind. And then if my CPI is actually at 1, I'm sort of right on track, if you will. The other way I sort of tend to look at it is if I have a CPI of, say, 1.2, how I sort of see that is for every dollar I spend, I'm actually earning $1.20 worth of work, if that makes sense. And then conversely, if I have a CPI of 0.8, for every dollar I spend, I'm only earning 80 cents worth of work, in simple terms here. The cost variance, as it says there, is basically the amount of budget or either surplus or deficit at a given point in time. Now, this cost variance looks at the earned value as compared to the actual incurred amount to determine whether there's a surplus or a deficit. The schedule performance, or schedule performance index, or SPI for short, is of course similar to the CPI in the sense that it's a ratio and is a measure of efficiency with respect to schedule. Similar to the CPI, the SPI is compared to a ratio of 1. So an SPI greater than 1 indicates that my task or project is trending ahead of schedule. And so of course, conversely, if it's less than 1, it's an indicator that my project is trending behind schedule. And then the schedule variance is a monetary value, essentially, that identifies a task or a project if it's ahead or behind the planned value. And then, of course, the estimate at and to completion is just identifying what the remaining budget will be at the end of the job and what it'll take to complete the work. So So these are, some of a whole variety of metrics that can be used to understand the health of your project. All these metrics are really showcased in Aimsio and does a great job with, identifying what they are. I just wanted to, quickly show how these
Dave,
formulas.
can I just interject for
Betcha.
1 second, just to come back to that previous screen? I just have a question as a non-project manager. I mean, how applicable are these calculations out there in the real world? And what I mean by that is, if you're building a pipeline, would these be the same kind of values as if you were, doing some kind of facility construction? Like, are they industry dependent, or are they just universal across all project management? Out of curiosity.
For sure. Universal. So in my opinion, a project's a project's a project. Whether you're building a pipeline, developing a computer program, building a house, all the same principles apply. You have a defined budget, a defined amount of resources that made up that budget, and a defined task. And so, yeah, these would be universally applicable to any project.
So safe to say, if you're not tracking these, that there's opportunity there to improve the way in which you're managing your projects today, if you're not tracking these.
100%. In fact, in my opinion,
Yeah.
if you're not tracking these or not using these metrics, you don't have optics on where your project's at. You're now relying on sort of a gut feel, if you will, which, I do respect people who are masters of their craft, their gut feel, but I always come back to numbers don't lie. And
Yeah.
I trust the numbers.
No, makes sense. Thanks, Dave.
To see these in sort of a practical sense, and I just wanted to showcase in Excel here, and I'll flip to Aimsio as well. But just so you can see how the formulas evolve here, the earned value amount is essentially taking our overall budget, and it calculates against how much physical we've completed. So in this sense, I'll just take this first line here, for example, concrete foundation. There was a budget of $50,000. We've completed 25% of that work. So now essentially we've earned 25% of that work, which equals $12,500. So that's our earned value amount, and that's how it's calculated. It takes the current budget times our physical percent complete. Our CPI, as we talked before, is a ratio compared to 1, and it's an indicator whether we are operating ahead or behind our budget. And so what it does, it calculates our earned value. Our earned value and our actual incurred. So the actual incurred is what it actually cost us to complete this portion of work, which could be different. In this case, it is. So it actually cost us less to produce 25% of this effort than we had planned. Hence, we have a greater than 1 cost performance index. So we're essentially, if all things were to remain equal at the end of this project, we'll finish under budget. So a great indicator for that particular task. Also, the cost variance, what that does, it shows us what essentially our surplus or deficit would be, or what it is at a given point in time for that particular task. So again, in this scenario, this concrete foundations, we earned $12,500. It only cost us $10,000. Ergo, we have a surplus budget of $2,500. Now, just for comparative purposes, the opposite is also the case where if we look at painting, we had earned, we finished 4% of this work. We earned basically $3,000 of this task, but it cost us $4,500 to complete that work. So giving us a CPI of less than 1, meaning that if all things remain equal, we're actually going to finish behind budget for this particular task, showing then we have a deficit of $1,500 for that particular task. So again, this would, for me as a project manager, cause me to immediately dive into this activity to determine what's the cause of the cost overrun. For each of these calculations, really you're not required to see, like, the story will not tell itself at the end of the project. The story will tell itself on really day 1 or week 1 of the project. And that's the beauty of these metrics is, you can see in real time the performance of your project and make course corrections if required, or at least have informed decisions to bring, underperforming tasks back on track. Just continuing on with these formulas, the schedule performance index, of course, looks at your planned value and your earned value to determine, am I ahead or behind schedule? So in this case here, I've earned more than what I planned to earn. Hence, I'm ahead of my schedule. So if all things remain equal, I'll finish this particular task ahead of schedule. Conversely, if I look at framing, I have a CPI of under 1, meaning if all things remain equal, I will likely be I will over exceed my schedule limit for this particular task, which can have a possible ripple effect with any dependencies to this task. So again, a very valuable tool for project managers to understand, what's the overall effect to my project if one particular task is behind schedule. The estimates are complete. Now there's a couple different ways to sort of skin a cat, if you will. The estimate complete, like I said before, is essentially the expected amount for a task or project at the completion of the work. The estimate complete is a performance-based metric, meaning that it's calculated using sort of past performance to estimate the total cost to complete a task or a project for that matter. I kind of use typically 2 different formulas I look at when I'm looking at my estimate to complete. The first one takes into account my CPI, meaning that if my CPI is going to remain the same, or if I think it's going to remain the same throughout the project, my first estimate at complete will look at my current budget divided by my CPI to determine how much money will take me, or where I'll be at when I'm done this project, or this particular task. So for concrete foundations, for example, my initial budget was $50,000, but I'm actually performing cost-wise ahead of budget because I have a CPI of 1.25. If all things remain equal, if that's to continue, when I'm done this activity, I will actually finish under budget according to how this formula is calculated. The other way to calculate the estimate at complete is to look at will the future work, be accomplished as per my plan. So I initially had planned, I would have a plan sort of scheduled out to complete that work. And if my CPI will change, meaning that, okay, all things won't be as the past. If things will continue now as per my plan, I need to take into account my planned work, which will change my calculation for my estimate at complete. So what it looks at how much have I actually incurred plus my current budget minus what my CPI minus my CPI to get what my new estimate at complete. So essentially 2 different ways to skin the cat. You can see they're different amounts just based on what the future is. So again, performance-based metric. The estimate to complete are essentially results of whatever calculation I decide to use for my estimate at complete. It's the remaining amount of money required to finish the work. So in this case, I've spent $10,000. I got $30,000 left to spend, or using the other metric, 37,500 to spend. So ultimately, the story here is that unless you're calculating or using these metrics, I really don't know how you can get optics on your project. Now, the beauty is, and where I really tip my cap to Aimsio, is all this information is at your fingertips and is easily directly displayed in Aimsio. So, which really eliminates all my need for Excel spreadsheets. I know that early in my career, it was amazing to me how these multi-million-dollar projects or more were essentially run on Excel spreadsheets, in which some are still today. But with Aimsio, I can really eliminate the need for all those Excel spreadsheets because all this information is presented at my fingertips within Aimsio. And this is just what I'm displaying here on screen is just really a fraction of the data that's provided. Just because in Aimsio, I'm able to, hide some of the columns that may not be of interest at this moment. But in Aimsio, I get optics on my earned value, what my actual costs are, what my CPI is, my estimate at complete. And so I really have a good visual on the health of my project.
Dave, I just did a quick poll, and it seems like there's about 70% of the attendees here today do track these metrics. There's a few that don't. So yeah, it's just exciting to see that by a vast majority, and whether you're an Aimsio customer, obviously you're going to see these metrics on a daily basis. But and if you're not, it sounds like there's still quite a few people out there that are looking at them. But I would assume, and this is just what I hear from the front lines, that the real-time availability of these metrics is the biggest issue for those that don't have a tool like this. Like they may have a series of spreadsheets sitting beside, their tracking tools or what have you, that they have to update manually, and that's always been the big thing. Is that's a lot of work. So seeing this here in near real time seems to be a really important thing. Would you agree that that's kind of the big distinction here in tracking these things separately compared to if you were tracking them in Aimsio?
100%. And to that point, the challenge has always been, from my experience, is getting timely data from the field. That has always been, an ever-going challenge. I feel like with Aimsio, well, not feel like, what the reality has been for me in my scenarios is that challenge has been eliminated through Aimsio, in the sense that, as long as daily tickets, time tickets are completed within Aimsio, the moment they're completed, my data is automatically updated. And so I do get that real-time data, and it's not a challenge really anymore, as long as my field personnel are entering their time tickets and doing their daily updates, which obviously is some training and some mentoring. But once that's accomplished, it's a beautiful thing to sit back and watch your project evolve in Aimsio in real time. And it's a benefit for all stakeholders for my projects, for the owners, for all those involved. I can tell them at a moment's notice exactly where we're at with
So
confidence.
safe to say that that training of the fields is really the only obstacle between real-time project insights and not real-time project insights. Is that fair to say?
Correct. Training, but just another plug, I guess, for Aimsio, the ease of use has been tremendous. And so, which is eliminated, or not eliminated, but made training a lot easier for the field. It's not a big leap for those in the field to complete, the timesheets using Aimsio. And so, yeah, it's really aided in training and receiving the data that I need.
Yeah, so it's moving everybody from more of this administrative capacity into more of an auditing capacity, right? You're not plugging numbers in anymore. Now you're just sitting back and watching them so you can react to your EVs and your CPIs and all that stuff, right?
Correct. Yeah. And the beauty is, as I start to trend, say below in a certain case, I immediately now can address, what's causing the delay. Is it, is it weather, or is it a factor of more work's been received from the client, which enters us all into the wonderful world of change management. And so I can be very proactive rather than reactionary, which from a client perspective, if I can give them, a far heads up to what's coming down, potential change that's coming, and start that communication early, so much easier than at the end of the project trying to fight over, a change order for X amount of dollars. It's never a good position to be in when you're at the end of the project sliding a $1 million change order across the table. It usually gets slid back.
If I may ask a question, Dave, 'cause you touched on it about the stakeholders and communication. So as a project manager, what is an effective way of, because you're sitting in between, right? You have a stakeholders, you have your customers as a stakeholders, your upper management as a stakeholders, and people in the field as a stakeholders, right? And then you're sitting in between. How do you communicate? Like when you detect something is going off track, or when you talk to the upper management, like how much detail do you share with them depending on the scenario?
You bet. A great question. So for myself, I always feel that the more information that I can provide, the better. Now I'm trying to be careful in that where I don't want to invite too many prodding questions, but I want to be open and transparent with my project. So I'll provide, well, for every project, I provide, a detailed weekly progress report. That's essentially data pulled right from Aimsio. I'll provide, daily updates through Aimsio via the field ticketing module. So the field ticketing module allows clients and stakeholders to understand what was done that particular day and how many resources it took, which also leads into my, weekly progress report. The other beauty of Aimsio, which I don't know if you'll touch on, is the integration with Power BI. Has made just huge leaps for providing optics to our clients, graphically with how the health of their project is performing, which, we'll provide direct, allow our clients to directly see some of those BI reports, if you will.
Thank you.
One more question, if you don't mind me asking, Dave. What are the limits to this? And what I mean by that is, with this, you've seen a lot of projects in your day, I'm sure, big ones, small ones. Does the size of the project matter? Not to be too cheeky, but like, does size matter, right? Like in this case, is it a large, gigantic, multi-million-dollar project that needs this only, or would smaller projects like $10,000 projects or something like that be just as important to try that? Like, how does that scale? Is there any kind of dependency there?
For sure. Initially, my opinion is no. Every project you should be tracking these metrics. However, with short projects that are, say a week or even a month long, it can be challenging to course correct if the project is very short. Now, with a longer project, you do have that luxury of, well, hopefully the luxury of, course correcting or implementing strategies to, bring you back on track, if you will. So for smaller projects, I still believe in tracking these metrics, but the information that I get from these metrics, sometimes it can be difficult to implement strategies because the project will be done, within 2 days, so to speak. So it can be challenging to implement strategies to fix, if you will.
Right. So it's not so much the dollar amount, but maybe the number of days of the project, right? So if
That's
it's a
right.
shorter one, okay.
But the reason why, to that point though, the reason why I do want to track all these metrics still is because ultimately I do want to create some comparisons, whether they be a short project or a long project, just so I can take that benchmark data and roll it back into my estimating, so I get, produce better estimates down the road. I don't want to take for granted just because it's a short project. I still want some metrics so I can use it as a benchmarking tool.
Right, for bids and such. Okay, yeah, of course. Makes sense.
I know I said that's my last question, but people who know me, I say that a lot. How does T&M project versus a lump sum project change your equation and the stuff that you look at here? Do you even look at this for your T&M projects where you get paid for whatever work you do?
For sure. I still do, regardless of the contract type. Again, for benchmarking purposes, I want to see how I'm performing internally for my project. Now, of course, in a lump sum environment, the clients are seeing all the metrics on an earned value basis. So they're not seeing what my actual costs are to complete, a particular task. But I want to still track that so I can have some comparative metrics and understand how I'm performing, for my particular task or project. Again, just to understand the health of my project and to provide some benchmarking data. Which kind of brings me to a point here. I just wanted to highlight this last slide, and this is a quote that I have on my desk because something I really believe in is that, obviously we can only manage what we measure, but it's a true statement where, when performance is measured, performance improves. I really believe that, but I also believe when that performance is measured and reported, that improvement really accelerates. And I really feel that's what Aimsio does for me, at least in my projects. It measures my performance, and it also allows me to report on that performance. And, as a testament, I have seen my projects improve. And that improvement has really been rapid as I've really adopted all the elements within Aimsio. And so I guess a plug for those that might be investigating and looking at it. I wholeheartedly support it. And it's been really a mission of my career over the 20 some years, looking at all different applications that are on the market. And I really feel I get a complete, end-to-end project management tool here with Aimsio.
I appreciate that, Dave. And I'm just going to ask, I've got a couple great questions here from the audience. Could you actually maybe go back to the Aimsio window that you had open there? And this is really a question for both you and Abbas. So I think it's important for both of you guys to address it. The question is, how is this connected to the accounting software to acquire spends, such as third-party and labor, equipment, and invoicing amounts? And what ERPs does Aimsio connect with? So ultimately, just to paraphrase the question, how does cost end up in here, right? And are we pulling costs from an accounting software, or how does that work? So maybe probably both of you could probably address this.
Do you want me to go first, Abbas?
Let's start with Abbas, I guess. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So within Aimsio, our relationship with cost has been, depends on who you talk to, right? What we call cost is not down to the cents after EI, insurance, all of that. It is an approximation, and we work with our customers to find the level that they're comfortable with. We usually say labor is your number one cost that has to be measured, and we ask them to put an hourly rate inside Aimsio, so we know if somebody worked 8 hours regular time, 2 hours overtime, what is a blended cost for that one person, including salaried people, right? So direct and indirect. And then for equipment, we also ask our customers to provide that cost per unit, because some units might be owned, some might be rented, depreciation, again, to the level that they're comfortable, that they can do it, right? Because not everybody knows, exact cost of their equipment. But as part of our onboarding, we go through this practice, we ask, and then we get to material and some other stuff that, we can also cost it and put it in there. But we always tell them this is not your payroll cost. This not necessarily, right? Sometimes some people use it for subcontractors, so they put in exactly how much they are supposed to charge them, your DSPs. And this is the real cost, but for their own employees, it is a blended cost, including some of the overheads that sits on top of their hourly rates. Dave?
Yeah, just to echo that, the clients that I work with, they put, obviously their costs are in their accounting software, and there's a variety of them: Sage, QuickBooks Online, Explorer, ADP. All those clients of mine have their actual cost for their employees, and we actually integrate, or Aimsio integrates with these applications and pulls the exact labor, like for Dave, for example, it'll pull over my labor costs with burdens into Aimsio, so I can compare my charge out rate versus my actual cost rate and get an idea of what my margins are and which is fantastic. And that it's been very seamless in my experience.
Thanks, gentlemen. And yeah, just to touch on the last question, which ERPs do we integrate with? So there's a few that Dave obviously just mentioned. We have a integrations page on our website as well that you can check out. And then if there are any other questions about which ones we integrate with, please feel free to reach out. We're going to move on to another question here as well. And I think it's a great one. It's can we provide some insight on how Aimsio is used when it comes to estimating and to populate the project budget? And if estimates are not done in Aimsio, Dave, have you used a platform that has allowed you to effectively upload a budget? So it's about that kind of estimating and pre-project stage, and maybe one or both of you could elaborate on that as well.
Sure. I'll go first here, boss. So for me, I really like Microsoft Projects. One, just because I can I can do a bottom-up sort of build-up of my project, and I sort of get an estimate and a schedule. I kind of kill two birds with one stone. But I can take that data out of projects, all my resource-loaded data with costs, and I can actually import that into Aimsio. In fact, this environment here, this WBS schedule. Now, I know in Aimsio there's an estimating module, and I know that's being ramped up or upgraded, which I'm really excited for. But you can, in Aimsio, you can really put a great amount of detail within each of your activities. You can identify the labor component of the budget, the equipment, any third-party services, and all that information is coming from my estimate, which I typically do in Microsoft Projects, just because I like to kind of kill the two birds with one stone, a schedule and an estimate in one. I don't know if
My
that
answer to
answers.
estimating budgeting is if you are used to Microsoft Project Primavera, HeavyBit, there are really specialized softwares out there that do a really good job on the estimating. We starting last year, we also built our budgeting tool. And that is currently in active development. We constantly add more and more to it. But this was for companies that were using Excel, which is probably the majority of companies out there that use a flavor of Excel. And I had done a webinar on that exactly. That we think that our tool is a step up of the Excel. And then for companies that do Primavera and Microsoft Project that are comfortable with those tools, we are building an easy to use CSV upload option that you can take your data from wherever you did your estimating and then bringing it to Aimsio. Because at the end of the day, the value of this is that real-time visibility. As the actuals roll in, then you can see them side by side. Whereas if you want to put it back to Microsoft, then it brings in a lot of administrative effort to kind of keep everything synchronized in that system. So we'd rather, especially the budgets, then once you have your budget at the beginning, that is fixed, right? The change orders can always come, and we manage it through Aimsio. But that is a pretty static data after it is done and you're awarded. Now the most important piece is to be on top of the project using the actual values.
Awesome. Thanks, Abbas. I know we're coming close to the end of time here. I have another question that is directed specifically to you, Dave. It says here, if you're putting or pulling actual costs from an external software, you're managing costs in or external to Aimsio, not in the WBS table. So it's wondering, if you're pulling in these costs from elsewhere, are you managing them in this WBS table that we're looking at here, or is that done elsewhere?
So yeah, sorry, you broke up there a little bit. Can you just repeat that question one more time?
No problem. So yeah, it's just essentially, just to paraphrase, if you're pulling in, you mentioned how you're pulling in costs from, an external tool like an ADP or something like that. Are you managing those in this WBS table, or are you managing those externally in like an Insights or something else?
Sure. I manage them right in Aimsio. And so I don't manage it in my accounting tool. In my opinion, accounting tools for the accountants. This Aimsio is my project management tool where I can manage my cost. Both my cost and my revenue. So to be, I guess, my rate sheet. I can manage it on my rate sheet level, but also on my actual cost level as well, right in Aimsio.
Gotcha.
Can I ask one last question, Dennis? You touched on BI and you said you build dashboards for your customers. Can you expand on that a little bit? Are you sharing it with every customer? You have like one dashboard and you give them their own project, overview?
Sure. Well, really, I let them dream up what they want to see, and then we go make it a reality. The power of BI has just been tremendous because it allows me to bring in data from not only Aimsio, but from other sources as well to collaborate or combine with Aimsio. And so, for example, we have like a project dashboard that will show cost performance on lump sum time material jobs. It'll also show it on third-party services. Then we also create dashboards on what labor was used that day, create dashboards on safety statistics. And so, really with the integration of Power BI, you're really only limited by what you can dream up of what you want to show, which has been a real competitive advantage for some of my clients, for sure.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. All right, so thanks everybody. Just to kind of wrap this all up, some of the main things that we discussed here, of course, one of Dave's favorite quotes, right? Measured performance improves performance, and I think it's a wonderful quote that's worth sticking on your monitor for sure. Also, that technology-driven analytics drives competitive advantage. We see that this is an increasingly competitive environment, and what I got out of this, of course, is that if I'm looking at real-time insights into my projects using the tools provided in Aimsio, big or small, I can use that information to become more competitively relevant and more competitive. So that's wonderful. We also have, of course, project managers can optimize processes, and performance is based on production dollars and effort. So, you shared a tremendous amount of wisdom here with us today, Dave, and I really appreciate it. And for anybody out there that is interested in getting in touch with Dave over at GateOne Projects, please do so. So his email is there up on the screen. So it's dave@gateoneprojects.com. Of course, with Aimsio, if you're interested in speaking with anybody in our team, you can reach out to customer success if you're an existing customer, or to our sales team if you're not. And there will be a recording of this webinar available on our website that you're more than welcome to share with your colleagues and friends if anybody else out there that you know of in your network is going to be interested in something like this. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody. And we really appreciate your attention here today, and looking forward to seeing you again at the next webinar.